What I would say is to embrace the humanity side of medicine. We're taught, even without words, just by watching examples of other doctors, that you should maintain a certain distance between yourself and the patient and family, a sort of professionalism, one would say. What I would say is to drop that and to show the families love and compassion and make yourself vulnerable. I've shed tears in front of families and, wondering at times whether I was crossing a boundary of being unprofessional, but learning later that actually the families feel that you're in it with them, that you're suffering with them. And I think that's important.
Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us today is Dr. David Sandberg. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon who is the director of pediatric neurosurgery at McGovern Medical School. And he's an author of an incredible book, Brain and Heart, The Triumphs and Struggles of a Pediatric Neurosurgeon. And what a heart-rendering book this is, Dr. David. And I will just also tell you that I've been involved with the Brain Tumor Foundation, which I think you know, in New York the last couple of decades. My dad had a brain tumor, which was successfully operated on by Dr. Kelly. I think you may remember Pat Kelly. If you're a neurosurgeon,
Absolutely.
you remember the Pat Kelly, a former head of Mayo Clinic, and then went on to NYU, the chief of neurosurgery there. He operated on my father, so I know a lot about this, probably more than the average person. But welcome to Open Book. You've had this extraordinary life, and you wrote this very moving book. But before we get there, I want to know a little bit about your journey, sir, into pediatric neurosurgery. Okay, you could have gone into dermatology, a little bit simpler of a business, right? But you went into pediatric neurosurgery. Why did you do that? And then we'll go talk about the memoir in a second.
So first of all, thank you for having me on your show. And thank you for all you've done for the Brain Tumor Foundation. It's something that a lot of people don't know about you, that you've been involved in helping, families navigate very difficult situations when they get the diagnosis of a brain tumor. It's not easy. So thank you for that. As far as my journey to pediatric neurosurgery, my father was a physician. He is a retired physician. He's an ophthalmologist. I went to medical school following his footsteps. He took me on some medical mission trips when I was in high school and college that were very meaningful to me. We went to Jamaica, Antigua, and the Dominican Republic, and I was attracted to medicine from the standpoint of service. I never thought I would become a neurosurgeon. One of the ways you figure out what you want to do is your emergency medicine rotation in medical school. And in that rotation, I found myself gravitating towards the surgical patients. It was just exciting. It was interesting. I liked the surgical approach to diseases. And then once I saw brain surgery and interacted with neurosurgeons, I was hooked.
It's a tough job, though. You're dealing, and first of all, you have a wonderful bedside manner. I mean, we don't know each other, but reading the book, I know that you're an empathic person and you're somebody that really cares about your patients and obviously the parents of your patients. And you've had some, you've had some really tough cases, which you described. So why write the memoir and why write it now?
So a number of reasons. I think first of all, as I went through my career, over 2 decades of being a pediatric neurosurgeon, I accumulated great stories. And every once in a while, I would think to myself, somebody's got to hear about this. And I would write myself down a few notes just to remember in case I would write it up in some form at some point. There are a lot of books that focus on the patient experience going through terrible diagnoses. There are a few books that really let you into the mind, the honest truth of what your doctor is thinking when he or she does the hard things, has the difficult conversations, tells a parent that your child has died, God forbid, or tells a parent that your child has a brain tumor, to know what's going through my mind when I have a surgical complication, all sorts of situations. And also, I thought, I'd accumulated some wisdom over the years that might be helpful for students, high school, college students, deciding, is being a doctor for me? Or for medical students, is being a neurosurgeon or a similar challenging specialty, is that for me? So those are the reasons I wrote the book.
It captures the intensity of the situation and it captures the emotional weight of performing brain surgery on children. What is it like to revisit some of these cases in such a personal way? I reading the book, I was feeling the weight of what's before you, and reading the book, I mean, you've got a tough job, sir. You're talking to people before the surgery, You're dealing with a young child, unfortunately, that is relying on his parents and relying on you and other responsible adults for their health and safety. And now you've got to talk to the parents. I mean, it's a super tough job, sir. So take us through. Uh, I mean, I'm reading the book. It gave me heart palpitations. You reliving it, did it give you heart palpitations? I mean,
Well,
it's a tough.
it's been my life, so it doesn't give me palpitations. It's a career that has tremendous highs and tremendous lows. It's hard to put into words the beauty of saving a child's life. And I've saved many, dramatic situations, and there's nothing more rewarding. The cases I remember most are the ones that we failed, are the ones where we tried to save a life and we're unable to. And worse still are when there's a surgical complication despite our best efforts.
I'm going to say it differently. See, I want to approach it differently. I feel like I'm getting from your book your internal thoughts. I feel like you've taken us through the mind of Dr. David Sandberg when he's going through this process. And so take us through, if you don't mind, in your own words, some of the things you're thinking about in the operating room, talking to a parent, getting yourself prepared to talk about a success, which is obviously probably a little easier and more joyous, but also a failure. And I don't mean a failure, just as, something that happens which we can't, that are outside of our control.
Yeah, I mean, so many different scenarios and so many different emotions. For a success, let's take a trauma, for example. A patient, God forbid, your kid is riding a bicycle, gets hit by a car. Please, all parents who are listening to this, have your kids wear helmets every single time they ride a bicycle. Um, and they hit their head, and all of a sudden they're unconscious and they're in an emergency room. They get a CT scan. There's a big blood clot shifting over the brain. You rush to the operating room. So there's an adrenaline, kind of like, it's the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl and you're the quarterback. And you're directing a team of people with a single purpose is to save the life of a child. And you've done it so many times, but there's still that rush, that adrenaline. There's anxiety. What's going to happen when I open this kid's skull? Is the brain going to swell out? Am I going to be able to save this child's life? When it goes well and the blood clot is out and the brain looks relaxed and the child is likely going to wake up and do okay, there's such an exhilaration that you feel. And, I can't wait to go out and have that conversation with the parents in which I tell them, I have good news. Your son or your daughter, I think he or she's going to be okay. We were able to remove this blood clot. The brain looks good. And then you hope and pray with them that that patient wakes up as you expect them to. On the other extreme are patients who you're giving the worst news a parent has ever heard. So let's take, for example, I did a lot of research in my career and I focused on recurrent malignant brain tumors in children, children who had failed everything. Your dad, thank God, had a benign tumor, a meningioma. I deal with benign tumors and also aggressive tumors, cancers. And those cancers are treated with surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, and novel therapies. And when you failed surgery multiple times and you failed every chemotherapy regimen that's been tried and you failed radiation, the odds are heavily stacked against you. And some of those patients came to me for clinical trials. We had a few dramatic successes, but we had many failures. And those conversations, I talk about one of those in the book. Those conversations are incredibly difficult. Obviously for the parents, it's the worst moment of their life. And for me, it takes its toll.
My father's situation, slow growing tumor, left him disoriented. He got dizzy. He fell, hit his head. Slow growing tumor undetected, however, it would have put a lot of pressure on his brain and could have led to his death without us really knowing what happened. And so one of the things we tried to do with the Brain Tumor Foundation, sir, was to raise awareness and to create a pathway of early detection. We offered low-cost brain scans and education because you and I both know catching something early, particularly as it relates to a brain issue, you have a higher rate of survivability. And so this is just a public service message from Dr. David Sandberg and Anthony Scaramucci in the middle of this podcast. But I want to go to your parenthood because something struck me about the book is that you are a doctor, you're a pediatric neurosurgeon, but you're also a dad. And tell us a little bit about how parenthood has shaped your approach to your job dealing with patients and their families?
So before I had children, I think I was a compassionate neurosurgeon. But once I had my own kids, I kind of got it a little bit more. You know, when you raise a child, you see how much you love that kid and how much effort, energy, joy, and love goes into raising that child. And, you get upset when your kid has a cold or a fever and doesn't feel well. Imagine if your child has a brain tumor. And I've never experienced that from a parental standpoint, but I've told, you know, so many patients, parents, that that's what's going on with their child. I think being a parent made me more empathetic to their situation.
You've gone to some underserved countries.
Yeah.
You've dropped yourself into places that usually the doctors, the hospital system doesn't have your level of expertise or your skill set. Tell us a little bit about that and what experience in that genre did it teach you about medicine, resilience, but also inequity, doctor?
Yeah, I mean, my children are so lucky, and I'm so lucky that if any of us in our family have a medical problem, we will get the best care in the world. We will get it within the city where we live, or we'll travel to another city because we have the means to do so. There are children all over the world in low and middle income countries who are dying every day of diseases that in the United States would be easily cured with a surgery or with a medicine or who knows what. And it's tragic. And I don't think those kids are any less worthy than my own children of receiving medical care that they deserve. So I've always been interested in neurosurgery in low and middle income countries. I've been on 20 trips or so, 10 of which have been to Haiti, which is the poorest country in our hemisphere, which has poverty which rivals the worst poverty in the world in sub Saharan Africa. And it's a 90-minute flight from Miami, and you get down there and it's a completely different world. I mean, it's completely unsafe. I mean, now I couldn't even go. It's not safe to be there. But even when it was safer, it wasn't really particularly safe. The diseases are so advanced. It's tragic. It certainly makes me appreciate what I have, what my children have. It makes me appreciate the tools and toys I have in the operating room because they certainly don't have them down there.
It's incredible, right? It's a, I don't know how to describe it. I'm always grateful for different things, but, your book made me so aware how lucky we are to live in this country and to have this availability of this type of healthcare, because the comparison and contrast that you write about, is tragic.
No
What do you
question.
hope for other doctors, medical students, even parents that what do you hope they take away from brain and heart?
Well, as far as other physicians and particularly young physicians, one thing I would say, surgeons have a stereotype about them that they're a little rough around the edges. They can be a little bit tough. Um, what I would say is to embrace the humanity side of medicine. And particularly, I think we're taught even without words, just by watching examples of other doctors, that you should maintain a certain distance between yourself and the patient and family, a sort of professionalism, one would say. What I would say is to drop that and to show the families love and compassion and make yourself vulnerable. I've shed tears in front of families. I talk about it in the book. And, you know, wondering at times whether I was crossing a boundary of being unprofessional, but learning later that actually the families feel that you're in it with them, that you're suffering with them. And I think that's important.
I want you to step back and I want you to give some advice to people about their brain. Almost like, they do on Instagram. They say, okay, so yeah, I'm a neurosurgeon. And if I were giving you some advice about your brain, I would do the following. Okay, so give me a couple things I should do. Think
Well,
about.
I'm focused,
Wear a helmet when you're riding a bicycle or
right. I'm,
motorsport, right?
yeah, I'm focused on children,
Yep.
right? And so
So it
I
says,
would
tell me about how I
rephrase
should protect my children.
right. So bicycle helmets I mentioned. I'm going to mention it again because it's so important. I've been practicing for over 20 years. I've never seen a devastating head injury from a child riding a bicycle who's wearing a helmet, but I've seen many kids who are dead or devastated who are not riding helmets, and that includes on scooters, ATVs, etc. Guns, right? We can talk about the Second Amendment and gun laws. I don't want to get into that. What I do want to get into is I think every single family can agree that if you own a gun, and there are plenty of them here where I am in Texas, and that's fine, that they should be locked up. They should be stored safely. Kids shouldn't find guns. I've had 4-year olds find a gun on the counter and shoot themselves or their sibling. It's absolutely crazy. Um, those are two things that I'm really focused on: gun safety and helmets.
I mean, it's nice to hear it. I wanted you to share that with us if you didn't mind. What about have you ever been in a situation, sir, where your emotions have gotten the best of you because of the case? And if so, describe that to us.
So one of the cases I describe in the book is this little girl, Jocelyn. She was the most adorable little girl who, when I would ask her to walk, she would exceed my asking and she would skip down the hall. She was the cutest little thing. She had one of these recurrent malignant brain tumors that failed everything. And I remember distinctly, usually I'm in a rush. I'm moving from place to place. I've got a lot to do. And I remember the morning of her MRI scan, after we had given her chemotherapy infusions into her brain in an experimental fashion, I was so anxious. I was so hopeful because she looked great. I was hopeful that the treatment was working and I couldn't focus on anything else. And then her images came up on the screen and her tumor had dramatically increased in size, laughing at my best attempts to do something. And then I had to go talk to the family. And usually I move quickly, as I said, but I walked very slowly because I was so reluctant. And when I sat down and went over the imaging studies with the family, I just kind of burst out crying, and not like a few little tears running down my cheeks, kind of choking on my words. And it was almost as if I was kind of letting out all the emotions from so many children who I've given bad news about. Um, but, as I said, I think the parents, I asked them about it later. I asked them, was that unprofessional? Because that's my self-perception. And they said, no, 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 we love you. We feel you're in it with us. And, that means the world.
God bless you, sir, for this type of work. I have a friend of mine that and one of the ways we're meeting is I have a friend of mine who has a child who has a brain cancer. They've used some chemotherapy on it. It's not a meningioma, and I'm forgetful of what the exact diagnosis is, but they're working with her, and she's developed some neurological deficits and some coordination deficits as a result of the tumor. And the parents are being stoic, and the parents are doing everything they can to keep the child living a normal life. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that I'm on the outside, sir, and I'm feeling it. You're on the inside, way closer to the emotional son of that, and I'm just wondering about the mental exercises that you have to do the job because you're a human being and you're a dad. So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that.
I mean, the hardest part is the conversations with the parents. I think it's so important to be brutally honest. So many doctors are not completely honest because they're afraid of giving bad news. It's hard to do. But, and it's something that medical students don't learn very well in medical school. I had 0 minutes in my whole medical education on talking to families. Nothing, no training whatsoever. I encourage students when I'm going and giving bad news, especially, to come and sit with me with the family and listen to how I do it, and then take the best of what I do. And if they don't like some things, ignore that and watch other people do it, because these interactions are so important. They're interactions that parents will remember for the rest of their lives. As far as its toll on me, it takes its toll. I mean, I'm kind of quiet about it at home. I separate my life. I come home, I might hug my kids a little harder. I usually don't tell them why. And I kind of keep it bottled up inside. And sometimes I share things with my wife, but many times I keep everything just bottled up inside.
Who is who is your mentor? I know your dad; he's a physician, but
Yeah.
there had to be somebody that you met in medical school, or a neurosurgeon, or a something guided you into this. So, was there
Yeah.
anybody that comes to mind?
I mean, there are so many. I've been so fortunate to have amazing mentors in neurosurgery. So it's not just one person, But the single biggest influence on my career was Mark Swadan, who is the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Weill Cornell Medical Center in New York. I was a resident in that program, and when I watched him, when he operates, it's absolutely beautiful. It's like poetry. Um, and when I watched him operate and the interactions he had with families, how much he cared about children, um, how much he cared about educating me, I said to myself, I want to be like that guy when I grow up. And I have modeled my career after his, decade after decade. So he's my inspiration.
We took 5 words out of your book. So if you've listened to our podcast before, my producer and I pick 5 words, and we want our authors to give us a reaction to things that they've written. And you can give me a sentence, 2 paragraph. If I say the word medicine to you, what comes to mind?
Honor. It's an honor to practice medicine. It's a privilege. Um, I've been so fortunate. My life has been so meaningful by having the opportunity to wake up every day and be your child, if you're the parent, your child's doctor. It's been a great privilege.
So when I hear the word medicine, I think service. Other people think profession, and there's a great dignity to medicine, and even in some ways a great status to medicine. But you're in the service of other people
Yeah.
in a way that's incredibly intense. If I say the word patience, and I don't mean patience like us waiting for our wives to get ready before we go to dinner. I'm talking about your patience and your clients and your profession.
Yeah.
What do you think of?
Precious children. Every child is worthy of love. Every child is worthy of health. The kids that I take care of are an inspiration to me because they are so brave. They are going through things that their peers and siblings are not going through. Their parents are terrified. They're terrified if they're old enough to understand what's going on. And yet they amaze me with their humor, with their resilience. Um, so I'm in awe of my patients.
But the word brain, I say the word brain.
Well, in the spirit of the book, what I would say is unpredictable, right? So when we think of, and that's why the title is Brain and Heart. The when we think of the brain, we think of a precise organ that does amazing things. It helps you see and feel, and use your hands and have complex thoughts and emotions and memories. So many things. Everything goes through the brain, and you think that neurosurgeons have it all figured out and we can target precise small areas in the brain for biopsies for surgery using modern technology. But there's so much of what we do that actually is not based upon good published data in the medical literature. It's based on our gut or our hearts. So it's neurosurgery is not as precise as you would think it is, and there's a lot we don't know about the brain.
Okay, so the next obvious word is going to be heart. So when I say heart,
In the context of the book, um, heart signifies a number of different things. Number one, the fact that you have to have a heart in order to do this work. You have to have a big heart, or else you shouldn't be in the field. The other is heartbreak. I've seen a lot of heartbreak, and I've experienced a lot of heartbreak. Um, and those are the main applications of the word for the book.
there's something else that struck me, and I want to just get your reaction to it. When you say brain and heart, and I read your book, I feel I'm not a physician. I don't have any experience in the medical world, but I feel that the average person sort of feels that these are parts like in a car, like the heart and the lungs and the brain and the leg. But yet, when you really think about the whole thing, it's so wildly interconnected. Everything is almost like one unit. And we have a tendency as non-professionals, non-medical professionals, to see it mechanically as opposed to holistically. Am I right about that, sir? Or how would you
No,
describe the human body?
it's just a perception thing. When neurosurgeons joke around with our other colleagues, I'll tell my cardiac surgery friends that the only purpose of the heart is to pump blood to the brain. And that if the heart doesn't work, no big deal. You just transplant it. But you can't transplant the brain, at least not yet. You probably never will be able to.
Right. Right. But I guess the point I'm making the point that like the brain is getting signals from the body,
Yeah.
responding to the signals to the body, and vice versa. It's just way more of a holistic unit. You're right. You
Yeah.
replace a kidney or a lung or, a heart.
I'm being facetious when I say that. No, it's these interactions are incredibly complex. I mean, it's amazing that you can think in your mind, you know, I want to pick up a pencil, and in lightning speed, you pick up the pencil, just right when you have that thought. But
Mhm,
what has to happen is you have to have that thought cause an action in a
mhm.
certain area of the brain, the motor cortex involving your hand, that shoots a signal from your brain down your spinal cord, and you pick up that pencil. And that's not even a complex function, right?
Yeah.
It's
Well, I mean,
amazing.
no, the other thing is like your brain is if you're overthinking something or you're dealing with high stress or high anxiety or you're running from a bear in the woods, your brain is flooding the body, right? It's sending signals to the body to flood it with adrenaline
Of
and
course.
cortisone and your heart, so to me, you know, I don't know. I mean, I spend a lot of time trying to think about how I can calm my brain down and control my brain, particularly in my job, right? You got to be doing that the same as you. So my last words, that was four of the words. I just wanted to ask that question. Four of the words. Fifth word, sort of three words, and I'll give you the last word, sir. When I say Dr. David Sandberg, what do you think? What do you think of?
Oh boy. I mean, luck. I've been so lucky to be Dr. David Sandberg. I was born into a house where I was given love and every opportunity, a house that every child deserves to have the opportunities that I've had. And, I had a career that I've cherished because I've worked really, really hard. But even with all the hard work in the world, I wouldn't have been able to do it without the opportunities that I've been given. Um, I'm so fortunate.
Well, listen, I'm the fortunate one to have been able to have got you on my show and you to share your stories with us and your great book. The title of the book is Brain and Heart: The Triumphs and Struggles of a Pediatric Neurosurgeon. It's written by Dr. David Sandberg. It's just a brilliant interview today, and book is awesome. Hope people go out and buy the book, sir. And thank you so much for joining us today on Open Book.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you again for all you have personally done over almost 2 decades since 2008 for countless families with brain tumors.
Well,
Um,
you're very sweet to bring it up. It's been nothing but a pleasure for me, and as you and I both know, because of the complexities of the brain and the blood-brain barrier issue, it's hard to get treatments into the brain,
yeah.
and it's been frustrating for all of us because we wanna cure these children in the worst possible way. It's not just our moms and dads or ourselves, but we certainly wanna cure the children, and so as long as I'm still walking around, David, you and I are gonna be working on this thing together, so joining us now is Jim Campbell. He's a radio host and author. The book is called Madoff Talks: Uncovering the Untold Story Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History. Jim, welcome to the show. But what a fascinating book. I just want to start with your interest in Madoff. I mean, you've had such a great career. What gravitated you towards Madoff? And tell us why you wanted to dig into this particular story.
Okay. First off, it's an honor to be on your show. We are both Tufts graduates, I have found out, so which is a great link there. And again, and you're a fund to funds guy, and of course, the feeder funds were at the heart of the let's say abrogation of due diligence. When it comes to Bernie, a lot of it was fortuitous because I was doing an interview with Lori Sandell, who wrote a book on the Madoff family side only. And out of the blue, she says, "Well, Jim, your show's live. Do you want to talk off the record with Andy Madoff?" The day before. So I call Andy. I jump all over him from the start and found him disarmingly honest. And he said he was going to listen to the show to see if he heard the same kind of stuff out of me. And then fortuitous number two, his mom is Ruth Madoff is moving to Greenwich from Florida, and I live in Greenwich. So I said I'll take her out to lunch. Probably no one else will. And we met in a restaurant in December. She had sunglasses on, wouldn't take them off until later. Ate a chef's salad like she hadn't eaten, and again we hit it off. And she said she was going to contact Bernie and tell Bernie to talk to me. So Bernie says, um, I'll talk to you. I said, Bernie, I'm going to vet single thing you say. He says, Jim, I'm going to accept that. And the next thing we know, we had 400 pages of communications. Why I was interested in three things. One, getting inside his mind, which is unfathomable. Number two, the Justice Department, the FBI, the bankruptcy trustee all thought Andy, Mark, and Ruth had to know. I wanted to do my own independent investigation, and I came up with a different answer. And thirdly, the untold story that hadn't been put together was the failure of the architecture of the regulatory system, from the SEC to SIPC to Wall Street. And I tried to build that all into one story. And let me just put one more plug in. The Netflix docuseries, Madoff, the Monster of Wall Street, is running. Joe Berlinger's the #1 true crime director for Netflix, did a superb job, very honest linkage directly to the book. And it must have been good because Jamie Dimon called me the day after it premiered.
Well, listen, I watched the documentary. I read the book. I found everything in the thing fascinating. And for me, it's like a great coroner's report. And I think, and I'm gonna applaud you for a second because you make all of us safer. After reading your book, I installed a few additional safeguards at Skybridge, and I want to test a theory on you, get your reaction. It felt like the Madoff crime was a close-knit crime. It was himself, perhaps his brother, an accountant, his assistant. And I really believe that the way you commit a crime, Jim, is with a closed net. If you've got 50 or 60 people working on it, there's always a person of conscience that says, hey, this isn't for me. I'm going to the feds or I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And so at Skybridge, I've got JP Morgan as my bank. I've got Pershing as my other, like clearing person, if you will. KPMG does our audits. So you've got 100 different people before a key can get turned or money can get released. There's enough people in the mix where a crime can't be committed. That was one of the big things that came out of the book for me. You don't think they were involved. I don't either, by the way, which is, I find there's a difference with the FBI. I guess they think everybody's a criminal. But I want to ask you this question because when I closed your book, I was like, how the hell did Jim Campbell get these people to open up the way they did? I mean, they disclosed new information to you, Jim. How did you get that done? It's not just the chef salad and your smile. Something else happened.
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, Bill Cohen, who wrote a blurb for the cover, said the same thing. How did I get these guys to talk? And, I guess I come across as objective, that I'm going to tell the story as I see it based on facts. I'm going to verify facts. And other than that, I have a hard time understanding because you got to remember, none of these, Bernie, Ruth, Andy, didn't know me from dirt. I came out of the blue. And none of them saw the book or any conclusions until the Sunday morning news, CBS Sunday morning. I was on that. And that was the first time they heard anything. They were all watching. And so it is hard to understand why Bernie would open them. Now, you said these things are closed. It was very close-knit. But the thing is, Bernie's mind is so compartmentalized that he kept everybody else in silos. So he's the only guy that even saw the overall perspective. And he never would have admitted to his family that he had to turn to a criminal enterprise to save his firm. And remember, he ran a wholesale trading firm that executed trades for discount brokers primarily. It was worth $3 billion of its own without any Ponzi scheme. And everybody on the 19th floor was honest and good. And then on the 17th floor was high school graduates who enabled the thing for 40 years and never even figured out it was a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, no, I felt like you had a Oriental rug and that, chestnut walnut on the 19th floor, but then you had this like laundry facility for the narcos, crime cartel,
Yes.
and the dichotomy was sort of bizarre. So tell us about Bernie Madoff, sociopath, accidental villain? Did he slip into it and then become evil? What happened in your mind? What were the revelations?
Yeah, that's another great question. Bernie gave me this intricate story that he hadn't really told publicly because of the fact he thought it was too complex. That he was running this purely legitimate business, and just like a gambler, took a loss and made the moral mistake and legal mistake of doubling down on it. No one will notice I run a little Ponzi. We'll catch up, and bingo, it'll go away. Which of course never happens, just like it doesn't happen in gambling. And, sociopath, he had a lack of empathy. In fact, he would start off and say, I'd say, Bernie, what is your remorse on this? And he'd say, well, my lawyers tell me I have to have remorse. And I said, well, that's not the best way, Bernie, to express remorse. So obviously there were signs of that. Berlinger said there were similarities to serial killers because he'd done Ted Bundy, a thing on Whitey Bulger, as well as Jeffrey Epstein. But the thing is that what happened is the wholesale trading business fit his psychology perfectly. Transaction-based commissions, if the market is up or down, control costs, leading edge in technology, and hire good people. The other business involved making trades where you could lose money, and he psychically could not accept any loss. And as you know, his fund went up every single month forever. And rather than say, this business of money management isn't for me, he basically doubled down on it. But here's the other thing is, as you said, that he slipped into this. That's what he was trying to convey. But once I looked at it, he ran both businesses side by side from the same time, which is really what's unfathomable.
Well, I want to set the scene for you because this man was so respected, Jim.
Yes.
When I joined Goldman Sachs, I was in the private client area. And so my task was to go out and meet high net worth individuals, ask them to open accounts with Goldman. And I was running into people that said, well, I want to do 1% a month. Will you be able to do 1% a month for me like Bernie Madoff? And I'm like, no, actually, I don't think we could do that. Well, you know what? I don't have any interest in you. I remember going back to my manager and saying, who the hell is Bernie Madoff? And how is he doing 1% a month? And it was, people can pretend otherwise, sir. It was a fait accompli that he had new sauce, a newfangled thinking. He had a strategy that was revered. No one. It was very few people. I know a few guys at the end, like Harry Markopoulos, and those guys got the wind of it. But remember, he had SEC audits. He thought he was cooked in 2005. And the SEC says, no, this is good. Thank you. We'll see you in a couple of years. So what was it? What was it about the Bernie Madoff aura? Everybody revises history now, Jim. Oh, I knew he was a crook. I did not know he was a crook. I met him 3 times. The only reason why I didn't invest with him is I didn't understand what he was doing. And so I had that cardinal rule for me. Trust me, I've lost money with other people, Jim. Okay, I'm not saying it that way, but what was it? What was his patina? What was his secret sauce?
And you're right. He had tremendous respect. And of course, I said, Bernie, the reason you're such a good con man is you're the anti-con. He was behind a curtain on the 17th floor. You couldn't really talk to him directly. He didn't allow due diligence, and he just produced these results. And this split strike conversion strategy, very opaque. I never found any of his clients or even on the 19th floor traders who understood it. And yet it was highly simple. It should have mirrored the overall indexes, right? Which, of course, right away tells you it's infeasible because you can't just, go straight up. The SEC never had the right people looking at his books. They kept having, because they were separate silos for money management, asset management, and broker-dealer. And they kept having only broker-dealer guys on who thought he was front-running, right? That was the rumor why he wasn't losing money. But he not only was never trading through his own firm, he was never trading at all. And sort of like SBF, he built this great scheme of credibility. SBF kind of bought it by giving donations and hiring, ex-guys out of the CFTC. Bernie did it through a combination of, he architected the NASDAQ, and then he was chairman. And the SEC used to actually go to him to ask him what was going on at a firm like Goldman or Salomon if they didn't understand what was going on. And he would help translated for him. Also, he didn't cheat. He never cheated his customers on the legitimate side of the business. He was one of the founders of payment for order flow, right? Which a lot of people say Robinhood abused, for instance. But he didn't abuse it. He gave that rebate back, but he gave them best price execution, even above the public market displays. So he had a tremendous image, and he was also a bully. He ran the firm like a family, which they loved, or he bullied you, or he paid you with golden handcuffs, overpaying these guys that were administrative high school graduates downstairs. $700,000 is what Annette Bongiorno was making when she retired with a $58 million fake IRA, and she had no education, basically.
Yeah, I mean, look, but I mean that's what he did. He sucked them in. They were very loyal to him, and they were helping him perpetrate this crime. He also had like an accountant across the Tappan Zee Bridge. Nobody really knew. People were okay with that because he was Bernie Madoff. Joe Berlinger, let's talk about him for a second. I saw an interview of Joe's on CNBC where he told Andrew Ross Sorkin he felt that the people that invested in Bernie's business knew he was a fraud, but they did it anyway because they wanted to get those returns, and a result of which they were like, hey, I don't care if the guy's a fraud. He's making me money. It's good for me. Do you believe that? Do you believe that people
I believe you can break it into three categories. One is people who definitely knew he was doing illegal stuff. They didn't know Ponzi scheme. And the big four fit under there, Jeffrey Pickauer and those folks. The feeders, a lot of them, Fairfield Greenwich, had to have known the results were real, okay? The second group is, well, we think he's a crook. He's our crook. He's probably front running, but so what? We'll let it go. And then the third group are completely innocent, many of them of moderate net worth, who'd been with him for 40 years and were completely clueless. So it kind of co-conspirators to willfully blind to innocent completely.
I don't want to give away the book because the book is just too good. But I got to ask these questions just to make our podcast interesting. Okay.
Sure.
Help me understand his lawyers, J.P. Morgan Chase. Help me understand the web of service providers around him. How could they have not tripped the switch somewhere?
Yeah, J.P. Morgan, and as I said, I'm a fan of Jamie Dimon, and he was very nice on the phone. He let me basically interrupt him and tell him he didn't have his information, but great guy. And I counted at least 6 divisions at J.P. Morgan who interfaced with Bernie, several of which knew something wasn't right. And there was they maintained there was no horizontal way to connect J.P. Morgan back then, and I give them that to a certain extent. But when the UK Madoff finally went to the UK Financial Authority because they were being threatened by the Colombian drug lords on the Bank Medici FEMA fund, they didn't bother to tell the SEC in the US or the divisions. And there were divisions like Private Wealth that were bragging that they hadn't got sucked into Bernie, but didn't tell their clients that, And of course, the basic thing, the 703 account, $170 billion went through that account, and JP Morgan was told it was an operating expense account, which is ridiculous. 1 month before it went down, they thought it was the market-making account, which had been at Bank of America for 30 years. So there should have been, and the other thing, they're the only people that could view his account, right? It was an equity strategy. There should have been $4.4 billion of dividends deposited. There should have been counterparty payments either way. And there was never $1 of dividend deposited and never $1 of counterparty transactions in that account. So yeah, it should have been widely open. The SEC missed 5 separate investigations, even when they caught him in contradictory statements and lies, etc. So it's hard not to blame. And the feeders knew he wasn't doing the strategy in the case of some of them.
Jim, the sins of the father. Did he kill his sons?
Yeah. That's a good question. Andy worded it this way: he killed my brother quickly, and he's killing me slowly. As you know, Andrew died in 2014, I believe, of leukemia that had recurred, and Mark committed suicide. And it's an unbelievable story. Eleanor Squilleri driving home that very first night in a car to Staten Island. Her daughter calls her in the car and says, she'd worked with in the front office as interns in the summer during their high school years, so she knew the boys. And Bernie's only been arrested for about 3 hours, and she tells her mother, "I know Mark. He's not going to be able to handle this. He's going to commit suicide." And he did. 2 years to the day of Bernie's arrest. A lot of people thought that might be a consciousness of guilt. No, it wasn't. It was that he couldn't deal with it. They were betrayed. He had a much more fragile ego. Andy was very tough.
But I mean, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I think there had to be some layers of depression in there on top of the calamity that his father perpetrated. Andy, of course, had leukemia. The stress probably of the whole situation contributed to that relapse. What can you tell us about Ruth Madoff?
Yeah. Ruth was almost cult-like devoted to Bernie. So she believed basically everything. And in fact, even after it happened, he was BSing her. And the boys were really saying, you got to cut contact with her or we're not going to have much to do with you. She was a very attractive, smart woman. And, she probably played a little bit more ignorant with me than she really is. But she did not know, she lived with her sister in Florida for a while. They were wiped out. So she and the husband were driving a limo to the airport as a service and to survive. And obviously they wouldn't have had Ruth with them. She trusted me completely. We texted all the time. And, I would tell her, I was talking to this person. They can't believe you didn't know. And, she would respond to that. And she was just a very interesting person. After the book went to McGraw-Hill, she said that she didn't want to talk anymore. I think part of that was because they were trying to get early compassionate release from Bernie. So the press, this wouldn't have been a good thing. As I say, I gave her the book, so she has it. I don't know what she thought of it. But, the fact that she totally trusted me and asked for no editorial content. In fact, as I said, I could have found that they were complicit. In fact, it went right down to the edge for me to find out confidently that they weren't. I had to find a deep throat inside Madoff to verify what I thought. The bankruptcy trustee thought these $800 million of losses that Bernie covered by laundering money from 17 to 19 was due to trading losses. It never made sense to me that a small proprietary group would have been kept going with 800 million of losses. And of course, it wasn't trading losses. But I had to verify that before I could be comfortable. And as I said, they're culpable on a moral basis, just as the SEC is. They took a lot of money out of there. And, they have to be accountable. Ruth signed the tax returns. The tax returns were totally phony by that guy in the strip mall that you're talking about.
What was the most surprising thing you learned, Jim?
The most surprising thing, I think, was Bernie's mind, and coupled with the complete failure of the regulatory system and on Wall Street. I don't think anybody realizes. We haven't talked about how SIPC failed, and it's just how, FINRA failed, the SEC failed, the feeder funds, the banks, the bankruptcy trustee then completely abused his power, if you ask me. And it's almost mind-boggling how the whole story hangs together like that. And of course, the fact that I found differently than the entire spectrum of the investigative bodies and the public on whether they knew or not. So those were all surprises, I think. But Bernie's is just a unique entity of himself. And remember, he pulled this off for 40 years. And it really unbelievable. As you know, Ponzi schemes by definition cannot last, and they generally cannot last long.
FTX. Let's talk about that.
Sure.
You may know this. I mean, I liked Sam. I trusted Sam. I
Yeah.
ended up selling a piece of my business to Sam. I guess the good news is he gave me the money, Jim. I didn't give him the money.
Right.
But and I admired Sam's parents, particularly his dad. I got very close to his dad.
Hmm.
Um, what's your reaction to the FTX story?
Yeah. My reaction to that is, first off, I found it very interesting that he and Bernie, as two different entities, Bernie looking like a Wall Street guy and SBF purposely not, but they both built reputations of credibility. Nobody in the crypto communities ever said I support regulation, and he presented that. And the thing about SBF that bothers me is basically his story is the dog ate my homework. Didn't know what I was doing. We had no accounting system. I didn't, and meanwhile, not only did he have all these conflict of interest things with the hedge fund Alameda, right, that his girlfriend was running who didn't know anything. But if the dog ate his homework, this is one hell of a smart dog. He had 1.3 billion that he borrowed against that, and they programmed it so that he would not be billed interest on top of that was accruing. Now, how does that happen without some degree of culpability? Having no systems in place. And again, now, similar to Madoff, I got to blame the institutions for a failure of due diligence, right? I mean, not talking about you necessarily, but Sequoia, BlackRock, all of those firms were basically vouching for the guy. So we have the same failure of due diligence we had before. We have the same building of sort of a false credibility. And a Ponzi scheme involves no real trading, right? But there was real trading in crypto, but the FTT token, which had to remain stable, right? Because all the loans on the money they'd absconded with as collateral had to stay consistent. I'm assuming there's got to be, and the SEC said that, some manipulation of the market to keep that FTT token. So, Sam seemed like a great guy. You say, his parents and everything, but the actions seem to be criminal in nature, above and beyond the dog eating his homework.
Well, listen, I mean, and again, he had the reason everybody got bamboozled. If you went into his data room, he had probably one of the more pristine data rooms. Moreover, like Bernie Madoff, there was some legitimacy going on. I spent 48 hours in the Bahamas, 24 of them, 12 hours a day, okay, on the trading desk, watching his activity, looking at flows, looking at data coming through the servers. He had 12.5% of the cryptocurrency markets from an exchange point of view. So,
Yeah.
so I mean, what he blew, Jim, is absolutely catastrophic and tragic. I mean, ultimately, like Madoff, he had an ego where he didn't want to quote unquote lose money. So he borrowed the money from his clients to make up for his losses. Had he just said, hey, I've lost money, I'm taking an XYZ loss, he had a very legitimate trading business going on.
It's funny you tell me that, because Madoff downstairs had a very intricate phony. He set up a screen that was, he said, live contact, right, with the DTC, where all the clearing goes on. And he says, I'll show you the inventory of my stocks. Pick one out. And the guy would say, okay, Apple. And then Di Pascali was in another room, right, putting and typing it into the screen. And that bamboozled people too. And of course, as you know, upstairs he did have completely legitimate systems. Every trade could be proven to clear through the DTC. 17th floor never had a trade go through the DTC. It is interesting, and they both play this sort of good guy, innocent type of thing as well, which to me makes them look like worse sociopaths, to be honest.
I agree with you. What does this say? If it says anything, but I'd like your opinion. What does it say about the culture on Wall Street?
You know, I'm a big fan of Wall Street. A lot of brilliant people, a lot of good work done. So I'm not, some kind of crusading and anti-Wall Street guy. I'm critical of the business conflicts of interest, right? Where the customer gets screwed. I'm critical of, there's sort of an unwritten omerta, because I kept asking, what Merrill and Goldman, for instance, said, we're not trading with this guy. Something's up. But they didn't tell anybody that, and they didn't tell clients, they didn't tell the SEC, and that kind of that kind of bothers me. And of course, the feeder funds, an absolute disgrace. Bernie passed on those fees to them, which means we have to give up all our due diligence, which is our only job, right? Administering and picking out funds that match risk profiles. And, so how can you not be, critical of that? Then you get to SBX years later, right? And the system failed again, basically. There is no crypto regulation. But, when this book came out, I said SPACs, which were a good innovation initially, crypto, Robinhood, all were going to blow up. And I was just saying that, right? And I'm not a regulatory guy. And, after all the years, every one of them blew up because the SEC is not a cop on the beat. It comes in afterwards to clean up messes. It's a cultural thing by the way they're set up.
Okay, so we're down to the point of my podcast where I come up with 5 words, Jim, and then you can react to these 5 words. You can give me a sentence, a paragraph, or just a word.
Okay.
What comes to mind. Okay, so the first word I want to give you is Ponzi. When I say Ponzi, what do you think of?
I say fake investment activity and makes people that are non-sophisticated highly susceptible. There is no such thing as a market-rated business that you can predict the rate of return, and Bernie would give that out on January 1, as you know.
Yeah, I mean, I say when I hear Ponzi, I think too good to be true, right? And that was probably, in hindsight, the FTX and the Madoff story. I want to go back to Wall Street. When I say Wall Street, what do you think of?
I think of the banks. I think of the folks on it, and both on the commercial bank side and on the investment banking side. And I think of basically a financial intermediary role. And I'm just a critic of business models that are in conflict. Robinhood's business model, payment for order flow, was screwing their clients, for instance.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's interesting because the best part of Wall Street is it's the arterial flow of capital through the American capitalist system. It's very vital to the whole economy. But the darker side of Wall Street is that there is some nefarious self-dealing that goes on that people have to be cautious of. When I say the Madoff sons, what do you say?
I say a tragic story. I say they don't get let off the hook for not figuring it out, although nobody figured it out. And Andy, who I knew personally, was a person of honor, a person of integrity. And the tragedy is unfathomable, although I don't put it on the level of wiping out a middle-class guy.
So these are 2 words, same person, but they mean different things, I think, right? So Madoff.
I think Madoff is synonymous with basically the criminal fraud on Wall Street, and able to pull this off over 40 years. He, again, was charismatic, brilliant in terms of what he done. He could have been a Bill Gates on Wall Street. So I get over that compartmentalized sociopathic mind.
I'm going to say the word Bernie. Isn't that different from the word Madoff?
Yeah, because Bernie, just the name Bernie came with trust. It came with credibility. It came with do not question me. And yeah, I see Madoff as the overall arching crime, and I see Bernie as the individual who pulled this off.
Yeah, it's this thing, and you mentioned it in the book, which is why I'm bringing up both of them. Let me ask you this question. This is in the same vein, and I want to get your reaction. The customer.
Yeah, the customer is a huge piece to me, and the customer was screwed in this throughout, and it's these innocent folks who were wiped out and devastated that just gets to my heart, and is what breaks you apart. And Wall Street really is founded on the customer. I have always admired Goldman Sachs credo of putting the customer first. And they have to fight that conflict all the time. They screw it up a lot. But it was there, and Gus Levy was behind that, as you know. And so I'm a big fan of firms that genuinely put the customer first.
Yeah, well, the legendary Gus Levy, John Weinberg Sr.,
Yes.
you're a Greenwich guy, so you know these men. John L. Weinberg, they all put the customer first. I think the problem we have on Wall Street is that when the customer turns into a counterparty, Jim, when the firm looks like I'm going to pick the customer off. The Robin Hood story is an example of that. Once the customer looks like a counterparty, then things get really bad on Wall Street. And so it's something we always have to be
I'll add, they hide behind that. They'll say, well, we're a counterparty, we're a principal here. So it doesn't, we're taking the opposite side to help facilitate stuff. But that doesn't mean that you screw the customer.
Right, exactly. Last one, the Madoff documentary. Why should people watch that, Jim?
Well, first off, and it's a theme of my book too, is people think they know the Madoff story. No, they don't. Most of it is unknown because of all these other components I said. And Berlinger did a tremendous job taking a complex story. I thought they would simplify it, dumb it down, make it sexy, appealing. And it is, I'm amazed. I get this all the time. I get questions. People that listen to the issues and the data and the story so closely that they've retained it. And that's the credit I give them. It's a very sophisticated crime, very complex. And if you watch that, you'll get it.
Well, listen, this has been a fabulous experience for me. I appreciate you joining us on Open Book. The title of the book is Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Untold Story Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History. And it was written by James Campbell. He's a radio host and an author and a fascinating raconteur. I really enjoyed this, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And it was my honor to be there. You speak a lot of truth to power. So thank you for your time.